The Charms bar's gone, everything's changing, and we're moving away from Windows 7 and Windows 8 to Microsoft's new brainchild, Windows 10. Are you ready to make the shift? We'll talk about it today on IT Accelerator. Welcome to the IT Accelerator. I'm Jarrett Heintz. Today, we're going to talk a little bit about the forthcoming Windows 10 iteration, and we're going to compare it a little bit to see how it stands up against its predecessor, Windows 8. In particular, we're going to take a look at some of the things that Windows 8 did and how Windows 10 actually deviates from that. Not a huge amount, but enough to make a pretty significant difference, and perhaps make it your new operating system. Okay, so let's kick things off by taking a look back at Windows 8. So we're looking at a Windows 8 desktop here, and the first thing I'm going to do is bring up the Windows 8 Charms bar. Love it or hate it, as I mentioned, Windows 8 Charms bar isn't going to be around for much longer. In fact, this was traditionally a swipe from the right gesture or a Windows C key to bring up the Charms bar. And this was an issue. A lot of IT technicians made the same comment to me, and I know I felt the same way. It shouldn't have taken me 10 minutes to figure out how to shut off the operating system. But sure enough, the Charms bar was meant to be a starting point. We could hit the start button here. Under settings, we could do things like go into power and then restart and shut down. And once you became accustomed to the Charms bar, things got a lot easier, but it was kind of that initial learning curve that I think threw a lot of people through the loop. Now, that's in stark contrast to what we have now here in our Windows 10 desktop. Now, first off, the Windows C key isn't going to bring this up. In fact, I just hit it, nothing responded. But what you're going to find is that a swipe from the right on a Windows 10 tablet will bring up something that's sort of reminiscent of the Charms bar, but in my humble opinion, quite a bit more helpful. Now, there's also a little notification icon down here in the lower right-hand corner, and this is going to trigger what would sort of be likened to the Charms bar in Windows 10. But instead, what you'll see is that we get a lot of buttons. Now, again, I would argue this is a far more user-friendly and far more accessible set of options, and most things aren't buried. You can kind of see plainly here that we've got a tablet mode to kick over to, which we'll do here in just a moment. We've got the ability to bring up OneNote with the Note button, rotation lock. Now, if we bring up all settings, and I'll kind of start there, all settings is kind of a consolidated secondary control panel, and I think Microsoft is sort of gravitating towards this. The old control panel still exists, but this is where Microsoft really sees you doing things like performing Windows updates. In fact, the traditional older control panel version of Windows updates is, as best I can find, no longer embedded in this actual interface anywhere, and to do any amount of Windows updating, you would come down here and check for updates. Now, the other major change that I think you'll find quite jarring if you're used to Windows 8, and okay, we're going to jump back over to Windows 8 here for just a second, is that if we hit the start button, which honestly there wasn't even a start button until Windows 8.1, but when that button came into play, here's what we got. The ability to kind of scroll through a variety of things called tiles. These were tiles that could be live tiles, which means that they would use, querying and RSS feeds and so on, and Windows Mail if you'd had that set up. They would all kind of shift dynamically and show you content on a per tile basis. You could move them around. You could even change what they actually kind of held in terms of content. But the problem with this particular screen is that many people complained this isn't an adequate replacement for my desktop interface. This is great for tablets. If you've had a Surface Pro or Surface Pro 2 or 3, then you may have really grown accustomed to this, maybe even like it. But here's the problem. On a desktop, there is a legitimate complaint to be had that this isn't the most optimal way to interact with your applications. Now, admittedly, things were actually pretty quick here. I mean, all you'd have to do, for example, if you wanted to open up the control panel, is simply start typing. And even Windows 8 to 8.1 saw a lot of improvements in that. But let's head back over to the desktop here of Windows 8 and note that this is kind of it. I'm either in it or I'm out of it. Let's jump back over to Windows 10 here. and take a look at the changes that have been made in this interface. Now, first and foremost, you can customize a little bit of what I'm about to show you, but I want to show you the kind of the de facto settings here from the get-go is that hitting the Windows key button no longer brings up a giant thing that takes over your whole screen. Instead, we get kind of a familiar look here in the left-hand column of a listing of applications, and then in the right-hand column, sort of a hybrid of what we had in Windows 8 with regards to that kind of screen takeover. Now, in addition to that, what you can see here is that I can pop open some additional settings. File Explorer, here's the power information, restart and shut down, but then there's also this All Apps option. And if I select this, I get an alphabetical listing of every single one of my apps. And say I want to make sure that my voice recorder is readily at hand, I can go ahead and drag this over. This tile is fully customizable. Bring it up. So there's a lot of merit to sort of Microsoft's compromise in the world of this particular scenario. Now, one of the other things that's interesting about what Microsoft did with this compromise is they realized that what they'd built for Windows 8 was probably a pretty great way to handle tablets. And so if we go back over here to the lower right-hand corner and take a look at this notification button, one of the options we have is tablet mode. If you have a tablet, you have the ability to toggle this on or off. When you select tablet mode, then what you're going to find is that that start menu that comes up does take over the entire screen. Now, the cool part about that is that even so, we still get that little, what some people call the hamburger menu, where we can jump over and see a full listing of all the available information that we could from the standard start menu. So we're not really at a loss here, but these nice big tiles are more conducive to using your fingers to navigate the operating system. And again, from here we can select all of our apps. But what's really interesting is if this, for whatever reason, becomes your preference, let's back out of tablet mode, we do have the ability under the settings to actually configure that behavior by default, even on the desktop. So what I'm going to do is here in the settings, I'm going to jump over to personalization. I'm going to jump over to the start options, and you'll see that there are several things on here that I can configure, one of which is use start full screen. Now, what this does is it sort of breaks the hybrid mode or breaks the compromise. And now when I hit the Windows button, it's going to go full screen just like it does in tablet mode. Now, love it or hate it, that's a pretty cool compromise. We really get kind of an in-between option here so that we can have this function this way on the desktop, we can jump over into tablet mode, and we can end up with our start menu however we like. But I should note that jumping into tablet mode isn't just about your start menu. What you'll notice is that everything becomes a full screen app here in tablet mode. Now, I do know a lot of folks that don't really care for this particular scenario, but what you can do on a lot of the apps, as you could back in Windows 8, is you can grab it and drag it down. But in tablet mode, there really is no direct mechanism to find the desktop. Even back in Windows 8, when everything was kind of molded together, you could get back to a desktop setting. Here, you're either opening an app or you're looking at the start menu. There really is no in-between. So if you're in tablet mode, you kind of get caught in this particular scenario, and I still have mixed feelings about that. So again, if we're looking at here in our Windows 8 machine, some of the things that we just sort of compared, full desktop, all the tiles, the concept's still there, but this is it. This is all we get. In Windows 10, we get the ability to jump back and forth between this particular mode. Now, there are definitely a lot of other changes, some of them small, some of them large. For example, here's the Windows 10 recycle bin, and here's the Windows 8 recycle bin. So we've got some icon refresh, some aesthetics, but another thing that a lot of people are getting excited about is the Edge browser. Now, one of the things that's cool about the Edge browser is that for Surface and tablet users who have pens, it's really designed to be used with the ability to effectively take screenshots and draw circles and then export what you've drawn upon. And this way you can highlight some web content and share it out to OneNote or export it into an email. A lot of cool opportunities. But another thing, and this is coming from a guy who's a really big Google fan, this thing seems so much more lightweight than Chrome. It snaps up, it moves around quickly, it really seems responsive. And that's probably because it's not loaded down with a bunch of add-ons yet, but in truth, it really does seem like they've put together a pretty appreciable step forward when we compare it to Internet Explorer. Another big feature of Windows 10 you'll find right down here, and that is that, we've got all of our standard tabbed options down here, and some people call it the taskbar, some people call it the tab bar as of Windows 8, but whatever you want to call it, there's a new guy on the line, and this is Cortana. Okay. Now, when you bring this up for the very first time, Cortana is going to ask you some questions and walk you through some tutorials. But as we kind of make our way through Cortana's setup, she's going to ask us to give ourselves a nickname. Pretty creative there, user. And then she's going to actually address us by this. And eventually, after she kind of comes online, she's going to show us a couple things about what she can and cannot do to sign into our Microsoft account. And then basically, once we're done, and I'm not going to sign into my Microsoft account right at the moment, but were I to do so, Cortana's going to start aggregating information about me. Some people like that, some people don't. But the cool thing about Cortana is that she's kind of a nice hybrid, and again, this is editorializing here a little bit, but I find she's kind of a nice hybrid between what you would think of when you looked at, say, kind of Apple's Siri and Google's Google Now. Really, she's going to respond. She's conversational. She responds back. You can have a two-way conversation and respond to things she says. She's also very quick to respond. You can ask her how old she is, and she'll make jokes if you ask her to. So she's clearly kind of catering towards that Siri crowd a little bit more than that Android crowd with regards to trying to make sort of a comparable experience. What's really interesting about Cortana, though, is that it's apparently the case that she's going to get ported on over to Android and iOS. And if that becomes the case, you can log into your Microsoft account, have that aggregated relationship with Cortana across multiple mobile devices, even if they're not natively running Windows. One other interesting thing I want to point out here, and this really has to do with some of the hot corners that we had back in Windows 8. Back in the day with Windows 8, I'm going to jump back over to its desktop here, we could drag from the left, and if we did a screen flick from the left back onto the screen, what we would effectively get is kind of a listing of recent applications. Now that was somewhat useful, but here in Windows 10, if you do a drag from left over to right, what you get is this sort of quick jump out of all the available open programs. You can even do some dragging of these programs, and depending on if you're in tablet mode or not, you can actually drag some over to the left, some over to the right for that split screen approach that Microsoft has been touting. But another thing that's kind of left over from Windows 8 is that if you're in tablet mode, and if you open up especially something like an actual native app here, check this out. I can do a standard drag down just like I could in Windows 8. That's exactly how things worked over here in Windows 8. If I had, say, the calendar open here, I could grab from the top and sometimes sort of kind of drag and close. So that's been effectively left alone. Though, I also need to point out that right now in tablet mode, that's sort of how things work. However, check out one other thing I'm really glad they did. And that is, a lot of users found themselves a little bit disoriented with the native app experience versus the regular desktop app. And what Microsoft has done here is they've taken these and look, they're windowed. So they run just like standard applications. You can blow them up, you can shrink them down. The only difference is that if you are in tablet mode, it's going to kick it into that full screen mode. So you really get to decide what your experience looks like and on the fly change that experience as you're using Windows 10.
So when all is said and done, is Windows 10 the operating system for you? Well, there are a couple other major features that have come out with Windows 10, and they're still in development. These are things that aren't really part of the operating system necessarily, but that the operating system is going to support over time. Universal Apps is the idea that you can actually run an application on a Windows phone, which admittedly hasn't taken off all that much yet, but maybe this will make a difference. And then that same application will run on your desktop, your tablet, and even your Xbox. So if you've got an Xbox One, we have a full tie-in to the entire ecosystem. Now, one of the other things that really isn't considered a new feature necessarily, but that I'm fairly excited to see forthcoming, is this idea that iOS and Android devices can be very easily ported from their native system into the Windows Store. Now, we know that the Windows Store has had some lackluster opportunities in the past, and it would be great to see Windows really emerge as a true third competitor. Right now, we could argue they're a very distant third competitor, but if iOS and Android apps can actually get moved over to the Windows platform, then the possibilities really do become limitless with regards to how Windows Phone might take off thereafter. It's exciting to see some of these additional features. Thanks for taking some time to check out Windows 10 with us. We're excited to see where it goes. Now, if you'd like to learn more about operating systems or security or networking, then come take a look at trainingcamp.com. We're an accelerated learning environment that will help you hone your skills and get your certification. And yes, when Windows 10 comes out, we'll be adding that to our list of available courseware. So come check us out at our website, and thanks so much for viewing.
Training Camp, changing the way people learn.